Welcome to Lecture 19, Music of the Caribbean Islands. Let's look at a brief history of the music of the Caribbean Islands. Now, it's a synthesis, and when we say synthesis, we mean like a combining of one thing to create something new. So it's a synthesis of African, European, Indian, which we, in this case, we mean indigenous influences, and largely created by the descendants of African slaves. So it's a real good source for this is Afro-Caribbean music. And that's a great way to say that. And if you want to do further research on it, that's where you would look. Along with contributions from other communities. So it's a real synthesis of many different kinds of music. And one of the interesting things about the whole Caribbean region is its diversity. Actually, it is probably the most ethnically diverse place on the planet. We're talking from the tip of Florida all the way down to the north part of South America, from north part of Brazil, and just an amazing diversity of different peoples and customs, traditions, all within this wonderful tropical region. So the island-specific cultures inform the music of the Caribbean. Each one of them is slightly different. And every island has its distinct musical styles. And they're all inspired to one degree or another, as I mentioned earlier, by the music brought over from the African slaves that were imported after the Spanish conquistadors basically settled and conquered this area from the indigenous populations. And most Caribbean music, like I said, is unique to its own island. And they have a heavy use of percussion instruments, complex rhythmic patterns, and call and response vocals. So we're going to look at 5 of the main islands. There are way too many wonderful examples for us to delve into in one lecture. It would take almost a quarter to go over all of the music in the entire Caribbean, because that would also include Honduras and Nicaragua, Guatemala, Mexico, Venezuela, Panama and Colombia, and parts of Brazil. But we're just going to look at the islands at this time. We'll cover some of those other cultures and the more modern music under a heading called Latin music. But let's just focus in this particular lecture on the Bahamas, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago. So we'll start with the Bahamas. And the Bahamas have a very unique style of music. Of course, every one of these islands incorporates many different styles today. But one of the traditional ones is called rake and scrape. And it's the traditional music of the Bahamas, alongside what was known as the Junkanoo dances and parades. And so this is really interesting. It combines musical elements from Africa and Europe. And one of the most interesting instruments that's used is the saw, and literally a crosscut saw that one would saw wood with. And instead of sawing with it, one scrapes the side of it as a rhythm instrument. So it acts like a rasp, which is really, really cool. And the tradition comes from the Turks and Caicos Islands and is characterized by this saw tool as the primary instrument. And it was brought to those islands between the 1920s and the 1940s. It started in an island called Cat Island and then spread to others. And you'll notice that it also uses drums and it uses a button accordion. So all these instruments we've studied before come together once again through immigration, through colonization, and trade. The next country we'll look at is Cuba. Now, Cuba has so many different styles of music. I thought I would just focus on one, and that's Afro-Cuban jazz. It's the earliest form of Latin jazz, and it mixes Afro-Cuban clave-based rhythms. Clave in Spanish means key, so that's a rhythm. If I had this sound, it would be the emphasis on And so that's called a clave. And each piece has its own clave. And then these rhythms are combined with jazz harmonies and techniques of improvisation. I'll demonstrate some of this in class. And then Afro-Cuban jazz emerged in the early 1940s during World War II and just prior to that with the Cuban musicians Mario Bauza and Frank Grillo Machito in the band Machito and his Afro-Cubans in New York City. So New York City became one of the most important cities for the dissemination of this. And if you've ever seen reruns of the old show on television, I Love Lucy, her husband, who was Desi Arnaz, was portrayed as a Cuban band leader, and it was modeled after Machito and his Afro-Cubans in New York City. And then we'll look at the Dominican Republic, and there's a music called Gaga, or Gaga, and it has nothing to do with Lady Gaga. She got her name from one of the songs of Queen, but it actually means a spiritual genre of music, usually played at baptisms and other religious ceremonies. And it's a style of parade music almost. It developed on the plantations as the workers carried on with their daily duties. The form of music is usually associated with individual sugarcane settlements in the Dominican Republic. And it's characterized by a processional style, like a parade, like I mentioned, and played on interlocking single-note brass instruments. So we have a good video that will really demonstrate this to you. So it's very ceremonial, and it's a parade style. And then in Jamaica, there are two main styles of music that got worldwide dissemination and popularity. The first one is ska. That originated in the late 1950s and was kind of the precursor to rock steady style and reggae. And it combines elements of Caribbean mento and calypso with American jazz and rhythm and blues. A fabulous, fast style of dance music that had its own style of dancing, and it had a resurgence in the 1980s and 90s in America. And then, of course, reggae, it's deeply linked to the religion Rastafari, which is an Afrocentric religion. When we say centric as a suffix, we mean that is kind of its origin in how it's centered around something. It's Afrocentric, which developed in Jamaica in the 1930s. And it aimed at promoting what's known as Pan-Africanism. And this is an appreciation for Africa around the world and for an understanding the oppression of the African people, but then also the wonderful side of all of Africa, the whole continent, and all the cultures, and their great contributions to the world. So reggae music became an important message and a means for transporting the vital ideas of Rastafari. So the musician becomes the messenger. And as a Rastafari see it, the soldier and the musician are tools for change. So this is a very, very socially oriented music. Bob Marley became one of the most popular reggae musicians, and we have an example of his most popular song, which I believe was top on Billboard charts for weeks several decades ago. And then Trinidad and Tobago are two islands that are in the south part of the Caribbean near South America. And they have two styles of music that are highly influential. One is called pan music, pan players, and these are steel drums. And they come from 55-gallon industrial oil drums. And the oil industry was very big down there and still is. And so these drums were left over, and the people would cut them and turn them into musical instruments. And they still do this today. In fact, now they're all over the world. Some are commercially developed. You can see in the picture, those are very modern versions of them that have been chrome plated. And what someone does is they take a really interesting couple of pieces of wood and pound out the top of that drum to make different pitches and different sounds. So it has almost like piano-like scales on these drums. And the groups are put together with many different styles you'll recognize this sound. And we've heard this in so many movies and in video games. It's fabulous music. And then calypso originated in the same area during the early to mid 19th century and spread to the rest of the Caribbean, the Antilles and Venezuela by the mid 20th century. Now, its rhythms can be traced back to West African kaizo and the arrival of French planters and their slaves from the French Antilles in the 18th century. Now, calypso is very important because the rhythms of calypso helped influence American jazz. So the basic rhythm one thinks of with calypso is bum, 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 so if the beat's like this, bum, 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 bum. And what's really interesting about that is it's all about syncopation. And syncopation means, in music, having all the emphasis on the upbeat, not the downbeat. If this is the downbeat, this is the upbeat. Bop, 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 bop. So I like to say that the emphasis is on the wrong syllable. And that's kind of a fun way of thinking about it. Your assignment is the usual. Just watch the videos, do the quiz on Google Docs, get it done as quickly as you can. So thank you, and I'll see you in class.